This podcast accompanies the acclaimed new docuseries In the Eye of the Storm, which follows the remarkable journey of maverick economist, politician, and whistleblower Yanis Varoufakis. Both the series and podcast explore the connections between power, democracy, capitalism, and the deepening crises of civilization. The series is available to watch now. Details in the description. Enjoy the conversation.
Well, look, maybe I should just say at the start, the idea of the podcast is to explore in greater depth the themes of the documentary that we're launching about Yanis's political journey at the same time. And one of the key themes is the rise of the far right and the spectre of fascism. And I think that overlaps, quite significantly with a lot of your work and your recent book. So I thought perhaps you could begin by kind of giving us a state of play as you see it in North America in terms of the rise of the right, and have things got worse in recent years and kind of the possibility of Trump's return? How are things looking?
Not good. Yeah. I can't remember an election cycle as grim as the one we're entering in 2024, with the combination of an unfolding genocide in Gaza being waged with the full partnership and beyond just support, but true partnership of the Biden administration, and Trump coming back with full force, repelling every criminal investigation, I think determined to seek vengeance, coming back in a different mood. I think it would be a real mistake to imagine a second Trump term after this interregnum as just a sort of seamless continuation of the first. He's just been marinating in rage this whole time. And of course, there's a huge irony in the way that Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, set the table for the situation that led up to October 7th, right? With the Abraham Accords, with moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and Trump has just been watching this whole thing unfold and is going to reap the benefits. But yeah, I think it's really a brutal situation, and it has to do in part with, I think, a deep failure of understanding the nature of fascism, of understanding it in an extremely exceptionalized way, where it's like all it is a sort of one-to-one recreation of Hitler and Mussolini in the 1930s and 40s, and we fail to see the omnipresence of the fascist project in colonialism and imperialism and Jim Crow and in earlier colonial genocides. And so because we turned it into something really, I say we, like in the imagination of the Allies and in the sort of traditional Holocaust education that I grew up with, I think we fail to recognize what many deep left thinkers recognized at the time in the 40s. I'm thinking of Walter Benjamin, who saw barbarism as the flip side of the civilizational project, as he wrote, shortly before his death, or W.E.B. Du Bois and Aimé Césaire, who were saying that this was imperialism coming home to Europe, and that nothing that the Nazis did had not been done to the so-called, darker nations. So I think we didn't understand it in that same way. And so now, the Democrats are poised to do this, Trump equals Hitler, vote against fascism. And you have a whole generation going, we see fascism in Gaza. This is genocide now. And so it isn't like a lesser evil, because what's more evil than genocide? So I think we are in a corner we have not been in before, and I think we need to recognize when we are in a kind of a rupture, right? Because there's such a tendency. I think we need to learn from history, but I also think we need to have the capacity to be flexible enough to see what is different, and this is not the election where, it was like Bush Kerry, where it was like, okay, you have two pro-war candidates, both in favor of the war in Iraq, but one of them waged the war and the other just kind of tacitly supported it or actively supported it. But, this is different. What Biden has done, in partnership with Netanyahu is very different. And so that old trope, right, that the Democrats are always able to deploy of like, well, do you want us or fascism? How does that work when we are seeing we're seeing a fascist genocide, a new iteration of it in Gaza?
I mean, I just want to say, yeah, it's the same situation in the UK, very much with Starmer backing to the hilt Israel as they carry out this genocide. Yanis, I wonder if you could respond to that and perhaps bring in the idea which you also talk about in the series, which is the collusion between the far right and the centre ground, and the fact that they're continually feeding off each other, especially electorally.
Before I get into that, I need to thank Naomi Klein once again for her work, particularly Naomi. The fact that you mentioned genocide 3 or 4 times. For someone like you to be doing this, given your background, your Jewish background, it is of central importance. It is exactly what we need now, because let's face it, those of us who dare question the activities, let me put it very bluntly and comically, the activities of the IDF in Gaza are immediately branded as anti-Semitic. And of course, you are being branded self-hating Jew, but it is crucial that we maintain the fight against anti-Semitism with exactly the same, within the same project, as maintaining the criticism, the rage against the genocide which is happening. And so, people like you, like Ilan Pape, like Gideon Levy, like Ofer Kassif, like our comrade in Berlin, Iris Heffetz. I think you are the greatest contributors to a modicum of humanism in this present juncture. So thanks for that. Now, regarding the rise of the ultra-right and what you said, Raul, the connivance or collusion between the authoritarian center or the radical center and the radical alt-right. I wouldn't use the word collusion because, the worst aspect of it all is that there is no collusion. I have no doubt that Biden hates Trump and Trump hates Biden with a passion. I have no doubt that Macron considers himself to be a true liberal whose job in this world, on this planet, is to fight against the ultra-right of Le Pen. But it doesn't matter because they are caught in a waltz. They are caught in a dynamic, in an infinite negative reinforcement dynamic, whereby what one does reinforces the other and vice versa, ad infinitum. So it really doesn't matter whether they like each other or whether they talk to one another. I mean, so there's no conspiracy here. That's the point I'm making. But let's face it, Biden would never have been president if it wasn't for Trump. And today, Trump wouldn't be there, even being considered as a possible president, if you didn't have Obama and Biden. Immediately after the great financial catastrophe of 2008, bailing out the bankers and condemning the masses to austerity. That is what gave rise to the malignancy which Trump then represented. So if they knew better, Biden should have a picture of Trump on his bedside table with a nice golden frame, and he should be sending him, blowing him kisses every night before he goes to bed. And Trump should have Biden's. Similarly between Le Pen and Macron. Macron would never have been president if it wasn't for Le Pen. And Le Pen would never have been able to capture the hopes and the fears and the anger of the many in France if it wasn't for the austerity policies that people like Macron have been implementing for all those years. Now, your latest book is by the way, I think it's and that's saying a lot. It's one of your most insightful books, and I have to say that I enjoyed it immensely, especially this dialectical approach you have to unpicking the manner in which genuine feel emotions of uncovering the truth amongst rightists, which is of course very interspersed with conspiracies and so on and so on. Nevertheless, the worst aspect of it is that they have authentic emotions. A lot of those emotions are justified. You know, when Trump in his inauguration talked about carnage, he was speaking the truth about a large segment of the population, you know, the deaths of despair. I mean, how can you, as a left-winger, not acknowledge that? And of course, the trick in the tail, as they say, about what Trump is doing, and people like Trump, is how they can weaponize these emotions in order to secure the authenticity of their alternative facts, in other words, their lies, to capture the power of the public that supports them on the basis of genuine discontent, go into the White House and immediately appoint somebody from Goldman Sachs to be the Treasury Secretary, and to pass legislation on behalf of the top 0.001%, which would be absolutely lethal electorally for anyone to propose unless they've already caught up the imagination and the pain of the people who have experienced the carnage. But that is not new, because as Naomi said, we are going through a retake on the mid-war period. When I was writing a book, 10, 15 years ago, I spent a good year. It wasn't actually a good year, it was a very bad year, reading almost everything that Goebbels had written. And if you read Goebbels' texts, especially his pamphlets and his speeches of the 1920s, not the 1930s, the 1920s, before they were successful, when they were at around 3.5%, the National Socialists, the Nazis, all his talks and his pamphlets and his articles comprised 500 words, almost exactly 500 words. The first 250 words were brilliant. You know, I endorsed them. It was a fantastic critique of finance, of banking, of capitalism, of exploitation, of austerity, of this, of that, and the other, right? Of the elites printing money on their own behalf and jeopardizing the middle class and the petty bourgeois savings and so on. And then, of course, on around word 250, so we have to kill the Jew. I mean, you know, the non sequitur. And then then the rest you can imagine. There's no point in reading the other half. But this, you know, the Steve Bannons of the world, and the, but even Boris Johnson, who is not as much a buffoon as he's being presented, if you hear him speak, some occasionally when he's not intoxicated, they are simply second-rate versions of Goebbels, because a lot of what they say resonates with reality. And as Goebbels said, every large lie has to be built on a myriad of small truths, and small truths that affect people and destroy their lives. So this is what we're having, and it's nothing new, except that, you know, it's not, second time is not as farce as Marx would put it, but it is just a second-rate version of what happened the first time around.
Yeah. And the first time wasn't the first time. I mean, this is what I think is so important about understanding even the significance of the South African case against Israel before the ICJ, where you have all of these Western powers lining up, you know, for Israel, including Germany, saying, you know, whatever the result, we stand with Israel. And then Namibia steps forward and says, excuse me, Germany, it's just because you've committed genocide several times doesn't make you the arbiter of what is genocide. Like, how about listening to some of your victims, including the Nama and Herero people who are recognized as the victims of the first genocide of the 20th century, which really gets neglected, where there's almost not almost, but really a white supremacist way of sort of ranking genocide. And so it's sort of like it's illegal to compare. I mean, increasingly actually illegal in Germany to compare the Holocaust to any other genocide, right? So it gets lifted out of history, and it gets treated like you can't trace anything that led to it, or any of the methods, the practices, like that, and Hitler was explicit about this. He said, I didn't invent the concentration camps, the British did. And of course the Germans ran horrific death camps on Herero territory, and conducted medical experiments that you could draw a straight line to, not only the medical experiments in Auschwitz, but the race theory that animated the entire project. I mean, they were measuring skulls. So we can't actually see this as the second time. We're in a loop here, and we need to. One of the things I write about in Doppelganger is my own, I think, bad Holocaust education. I went to a Jewish school, a Jewish day school, and we learned, the statistics of the Holocaust, like they were mathematical tables just drummed into us. And a friend of mine, who's one of the founders of Jewish Voice for Peace, which is an extraordinary, Jewish anti-Zionist organization that I've been a part of now for 15 years, Cecily said, that we grew up not with remembering the Holocaust, but with re-traumatization. That this is a culture not of remembering, even though it's called the Holocaust remembrance and so on, but it's actually a practice designed to keep the descendants in a heightened traumatized state, right? So it gets reenacted, right? Like, we would like to think about the Holocaust museums where you're put onto cattle cars. So the idea is to get a bodily experience. And so this is a kind of a dismemberment, right? In a way, it's not a remembering, because what remembering does is it tries to put the kind of traumatized pieces of the self back together again, because what trauma does is it splits the self. And we have so-called leaders in the Jewish community who want us traumatized, who want us afraid, right? Which is the opposite of leadership. And so this is why I think this historical work is so important, because what's actually happening is real remembering, and that this event that has been lifted out of history, and that we're told we can't trace the lines that created it, and we can't look at the lines that happened afterwards. We have to just see it as this rupture in time and space. We now have generations of young people who are, the Black Lives Matter generation, who are, the people who, led Rhodes Bus Fall, who have done this sort of digging about the colonial histories of their own countries. And they are seeing the patterns, and their elders are freaking out because they actually have educated themselves. And, as you know, Yanis, you're a teacher. What do we want from students? We want them to be able to think critically, to recognize patterns, not just to memorize, like a rule. Don't be mean to Jews. No, that's not the lesson. The lesson is don't practice othering. Don't create an in-group and an out-group. And all of these other principles. And this is why I always say Germany is a terrible student, because they learned a rule, but they didn't learn a principle. So now they're like, okay, well, the rule is stand with Israel, but we're going to transfer all of these similar sort of patterns of thought and project them onto Muslims and Palestinians and immigrants. And so, so anyway, that's just a bit of a tangent, but I think it's really important that we get out of the practice of thinking about just a repetition of that particular kind of fascism. I think we need to see this as a kind of a fascist constellation, or a recurrence, and that we are in a process of truly remembering, so that we can get out of the loop, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. As I'm preparing to go to Germany with Raoul,
Wait.
we are going there supposedly to promote this documentary, but also I'm doing some electoral work because, as you know, we have European Parliament elections coming up in June, and our party is running in Germany. Our German comrades are running in Germany under very difficult conditions. We are having our, the venues are being cancelled on us simply because we mention genocide, because it seems to me that in Germany these days, you can only mention genocide if you are supporting it, not if you are opposing it. And boom, boom, what I mean by this is that if you talk about the river to the sea from an Israeli point of view, that is, that's the standard Netanyahu line, that's fine in Israel. But if you talk about equal and universal rights from the river to the sea, that is considered to be genocide. So if you oppose genocide, you're being defunded and barred. Even within our own movement, Naomi, it was very difficult to make the arguments that you're making. Even within our own movement, our own comrades, people on the left who intellectually agree with everything that you just said. Emotionally, they have been essentially trained, conditioned to use the very justifiable and justified collective guilt over the Holocaust in order to justify anything that Israel does. In other words, I I asked some of my comrades, how far does the genocide of the Palestinians have to go before your justified guilt over the Holocaust no longer prevents you from saying no to the continuation of the genocide of the Palestinians? And the answer was infinitely. I mean, they didn't actually
There's no
put in,
line. There's no
but
line.
but it was clear that there is no quantity of Palestinian blood that needs to be shed before they would say, no, this is unacceptable, that this is genocide itself. And I really like what you said about the adoption of a rule without the conquering of a principle. That has been my it's been my experience since 2014, 2015, has always impeded any proper democratic discussion across Europe. When the Troika was saying to us here in Greece, but this is the rule. And you questioned, firstly, whether it was the rule, because they were making up these rules as they were going along. They were very adaptable rules. And secondly, okay, even if it is the rule, why should we have this rule? Are we here to serve the rules, or are the rules here to serve our principles? Our principles of humanity, our principles of not letting people starve when it is unnecessary for them to starve, like we had during the depths of the Greek crisis. And the response was, but these are the rules. And why are these the rules? Because they are the rules. So it was a tautology that went round and round and round. And I see exactly what you mean through that prism.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when I was watching Raoul, your wonderful documentary, I think it's going to be so powerful. I mean, speaking about education, like just to have this, it's a profound document of such an important moment in our history, and it really is, I'm convinced, the moment that brought us to now. And it's one of the things that I least understood about the horrific and punishing austerity that was imposed on Southern Europe, and Greece in particular, by Germany. Because like the rule that I learned growing up as a Jewish kid about the sort of cocktail that created the Holocaust was, when you punish people, when you create horrific economic conditions, they look for a scapegoat, and they found us, they found the Jews. And to watch a German chancellor recreate the conditions. And I remember being in Greece, in 2013, which was just when Golden Dawn was emerging. It was pre Yanis in government. You know, it was that moment when it was pretty clear you guys were already the opposition. You'd gotten very close, but Golden Dawn was starting to really gain ground. I remember, you know, talking to comrades in Athens, and they were really scared about this. And it was just that feeling of like, okay, it's really us or them. I mean, this is the thing, you know, that what I work with in the book is this idea that what the right is a warped doppelganger of the left, right? This is why the centrists can't beat them. It's only the left that can beat them, because they are taking the rage and the at inequality and injustice that is rightfully the terrain of the left, and they're doing a bait and switch with it. But the weaker the left is, and the more the left betrays its own principles, the more of an opening they have. And that's, you know, it's that sort of triangle between the center, the right, and the left. And that's why I hate the kind of horseshoe theory that tries to create an equivalency between, you know, the left, you know, the quote unquote far left and the far right. We are the only ones who can beat them, because we actually have real answers and real solutions to the real pain that they are speaking to, whereas all they have is, you know, the ability, as Yanis was saying, to tap into it, and then to pivot over to, you know, go after the Jew, the immigrant, you know, whoever the scapegoat of the day is. But yeah, I mean, watching that moment, you know, when Merkel steps in, I mean, how can we pretend Germany has ever learned these lessons? If they're, I mean, they learned it at home. This is why they have a strong welfare state. But then they go and create the crisis elsewhere.
But of course, that crisis has now bitten them.
Oh, sure, it always comes home.
Because
Yeah.
the austerity that they imposed upon the rest of Europe caused a massive diminution in investment, a complete failure to invest in green technologies and green energy. Complete failure. You can see now that the Green Party in government is opening up lignite mines again as a result of that failure to invest in green energy for 15 years now, because of the austerity they imposed upon us. But you see, somebody like Schäuble, who died last December, was an ideologue, Naomi. He believed in austerity. And deep down, the reason why he was imposing it on us was because he wanted it to be exported from Greece to Ireland, to Portugal, in order finally to return to Germany. And within 2 years of the 2010 bailout of Greece and the austerity package here, he imposed it on his own country. As we speak, the German government of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, the Free Democrats, are imposing an austerity budget on the people of Germany. So at a time when we have an energy crisis, there is a war in Ukraine, natural gas has been switched off. Instead of investing on the things that Germany, even the capitalist class of Germany requires, you know, the industrialists, instead of doing that, they're imposing austerity upon themselves, as
the far right is surging and having secret
because they are the only position.
Massive deportations. Yeah.
Right. Because if you have the Social Democrats introducing austerity, the right are going to be the only ones who benefit in the end.
Mm-hmm. It's like a compulsion. What is this? Like, there's like a compulsive repeating of history that is truly bizarre, and it's happening around the world.
If I could just jump in, yeah. First of all, I want to say thanks to Naomi for kind comments about the series, and I'm getting a kind of really interesting refrain, and I think really important one, about realizing that none of this is new, and it goes back a lot further than many of us are taught. The horrors of genocide and this sort of cycle of violence and imperialism. But I think there is something which is new about this moment, and it's the accelerating pace of technological advance, which is really outstripping the pace, I think, of resistance movements. Mm-hmm. We're constantly behind. You've got this like exponential development of tech, which is constantly weaponized, sometimes consciously, and sometimes simply as a byproduct of capitalist dynamics, whereby you're trying to optimize for time on site. And that ends up meaning, you know, playing to our fears and our insecurities and all that sort of thing. So it's something you've both written about, Yanis, with techno-feudalism, and Naomi in your recent book. So I just wondered what your thoughts were, this relationship with kind of the emerging and rapidly changing technology and these same patterns of domination and sort of divide and rule. Maybe Naomi, we could go to you for that.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky moment because, I'm not a fan of these technologies. I think they've played a huge role in shredding the left culture. I want to say, like, not the left, but a kind of a way of being with one another, a kind of a comradeliness. I don't want to overly romanticize. Obviously, the left has always had lots of fighting and sectarianism and intramural cruelty, but I think the extent to which it is just a pastime it has been massively augmented by these technologies. What I will say, and what I deeply agree with Yanis on in his really important analysis in techno-feudalism around that this is another phase. This is one of these ruptures where we have to understand that like what is new about this, and it is an enclosure of our very selves, right? So if we think about the enclosures of the commons, what is enclosed by these by the privatization, not just of our communications with each other, but of our faces with facial recognition technology, of our friendships, of our political movements, with sort of the hashtagging of politics. It's it is, I want to say, the final frontier of the neoliberal project in many ways, but I think it goes beyond that because it can go a lot further with with AI and the creation of these doubles of ourselves that we don't have control over and so on. But it's a bit of a complicated moment because these companies wouldn't have grown in the way that they have as quickly as they have, the social media companies, if they weren't fulfilling a need and also entering into the gap created by corporate centrism, right? Which we also see in the midst of genocide in Gaza, because the mainstream press has failed so spectacularly to tell us the truth, to get their cameras in, to get their people in. So it is these heroic, Instagram, and Twitter accounts of Palestinian journalists on the ground who are the main reason we know what is that is happening. So, I don't think that redeems the project, but I think it points to the fact that we need an actual commons for our communication, and we need to deprivatize our very selves and our relationships. And I do think that we are in such one of the reasons why I appreciate Progressive International is that it's a kind of a return to a more, it uses these digital tools, but it's a return to a tradition of actually getting together, as opposed to just as individuals kind of screaming at each other online. I think that if we didn't have that kind of escape valve to be able to spend our days doing that, we probably would be getting together more and strategizing more and organizing more. So I think it's sort of this double edge that these tools are helping in some ways to just let us know what's going on, but they're also hurting our organizing abilities by distracting us. I don't know. How does that map sound to you, Yanis?
Sure, absolutely. Look, for me, the technology is never the culprit. Suppose that a steam engine was invented in ancient Egypt. It would have made no difference. The pharaoh would have it in his palace and show it off to his visiting dignitaries, because there was so much slave labor to build the pyramids and to plow the lands around the Nile and to create, harvest and so on. So the technology on its own means nothing. It has not a great impact. What happens is when the social relations of production are so advanced or are sufficiently advanced for a new piece of technology to come in and give enormous power to the owners of that technology, like the steam engine in the late 18th century early 19th century. Then it became an instrument that facilitated, along with the enclosures, of course, before that, and the creation of the working class and the commodification of the land, it created the factory. And once the factory was created, you had created, this monstrous power of capital, of privately owned capital. What is happening now with big tech, and that's why I'm irritating a lot of my comrades on the left by talking about techno-feudalism as opposed to some kind of digital or platform capitalism, is that the technologies that Naomi is referring to that poison our conversation, that create the enclosure of ourselves within these algorithmic spaces, which are essentially digital fiefdoms ruled by people like Zuckerberg and Google and so on and so forth, and Bezos, in order to extract gigantic rents from both us as a new kind of serf, cloud serf, I call us now, as well as capitalists who, now have to pay 40% of the price they receive from us when you buy a pair of binoculars on Amazon.com. 40% of that, which is huge, gigantic rent, goes into the bank account of Jeff Bezos for doing nothing. He doesn't produce anything. He's produced a digital fiefdom. So we have a new form of capital, cloud capital, I call it. It's what lives inside our various screens and appliances. And it's very different from every other kind of capital we had. Because every other kind of capital we had was a produced means of production. It was a machine that was built in order to produce other stuff. This capital, cloud capital, is significant, and it creates a new phase, as Naomi put it, because it is not a produced means of production, but it's a produced means of behavioral modification. For the first time in the history of humanity, we always had prophets and authors and orators and musicians and advertisers and marketeers and politicians trying to modify our behavior, but they were human beings. We could see them, look at their face and recognize or try to recognize their motivation and so on and so forth. Now there is an algorithm, and that algorithm is in an infinitely dialectical relationship with us. We train it to train us, to train it, to train us, to train it ad infinitum, to put desires into our heart and to modify a behavior in a way which is maximizing the probability that Jeff Bezos is going to get another dollar out of the people who sell things to us, while we are replenishing for free his cloud capital that reproduces itself and his power to do that. That's what I call techno-feudalism. And those algorithms, when it comes to the public square, to the conversation, they are primed to poison the conversation between us. There's no doubt about that. But at the very same time, we need, we can't turn the clock back. So just like with Gutenberg and printing, which was an instrument in the hands of the Catholic hierarchy to produce the Bible and to produce the propaganda of the church, well, we produced pamphlets as well. So we need to use those technologies against their owners, and that's a very old story. It's nothing new. But at the same time, to imagine a world where algorithms are cooperatively owned, and then they're very, very different things. So compare and contrast, just very briefly, what happens when you call an Uber today with what you could have had if we had a kind of participatory socialism. So today with Uber, for me to use Uber on my phone, I have already to have begged my banker to prove to Uber who I am through my credit card or debit card. So I do not own even my own digital identity. I have to go to Wall Street to get them to subcontract to me my capacity to prove to Uber who the hell I am. And then I call for an Uber car, and that immediately divests a lot of, or invests or vests huge amounts of data about where I am, where I'm going, what mood I am in when I'm going to Uber. Uber exploits the data while exploiting the driver who's driving me, okay? They don't even need to own a car. So that's techno-feudalism today. But I imagine a completely different world in which we own our data by law and we own our digital identity. And we don't have to have an app for anything, or an app belonging to any conglomerate. And you can simply say on your phone to an app which is communally owned, like HTTP is owned, communally. It's a commons. HTTP is the protocol by which we visit websites. We don't pay for that. Somebody produced it and put it out there. We don't even remember who it was, and it was given away for free. So imagine there is such a commons app that you use, and you say, look, I'm Yanis. I'm on the street corner between 6th and whatever, and I'm going to the airport. Who wants to take me? And cooperatives, cooperatively run taxi services, or even the municipal bus service, they can send me an email or a message saying, you idiot, there is a bus next to you that takes you to the airport, for free and very quickly. Now, that kind of algorithm is a very different beast to the one we have with Uber. So the answer is not, switch off the phones and throw them in the bin. The answer is take over the means of communication.
So, Yanis, one thing that came back to me also while watching Raoul's film is just the lost opportunity of the rupture of 2008, of the moment of global uprising afterwards, of just the indisputable evidence that the system is rigged and failing, and then having these hope and change candidates come to power in different countries, and have them just continue the status quo. I mean, that's the story of Greece. It's the story of the Obama administration. And it could have been otherwise, right? But those moments, those ruptures, right, are those they are the like, this is what I learned from studying the shock, what I call the shock doctrine, is like the right has been ready in moments of rupture, and in recent decades, the left has not been ready, and has not had the nerve to be bold, right? I mean, I remember meeting with Tsipras before he was in power, making the case to him, this is your Green New Deal moment, and he said, "Oh, people don't care about climate change now," like look, we and it's like, we actually can do multiple things at once. We can go big. So I think listening to you and just the scale of what you're describing and how far gone it seems, I think it will only change in a moment of rupture, of some kind of rupture, some kind of crisis. So is it coming? How do we get rupture ready? That's my question for you.
It's exactly, okay. I keep, Raoul has heard me say this before, I keep using the metaphor of a surfer. The surfer cannot create the wave, but the surfer has a duty to be ready to jump on it when when it comes. And if you miss it, you have to wait a long time. So these waves, for people like us, for the good people who occupied Wall Street, or the City of London, or the Indignados in Spain, or the Aganatismeni in Syntagma Square in Greece, that comes around every 20, 30 years, even if that. And we need to be ready. And that is, Naomi, since 2010 or so, all I've been doing, and I'm sure it's the same thing with you, is trying to get ready. Whether this is the European Green New Deal that we tabled in the European Parliament elections 2019, with your help as well, or the program that we're putting forward now for the European Parliament election for June 2024, our program here in Greece, the work we're doing with the Progressive International. But I have to confess to you that the reaction you got from Tsipras is not uncommon today. I mean, it's waned. People are far more aware of how crucial the climate catastrophe is, and also that it gives us opportunities for shared prosperity and new kinds of jobs, and reconsidering and recreating and re-envisioning work, and re-envisioning what it means to be well off. But again, the left has not cottoned on to the extent that it should have cottoned on. So we have a major, major job to do in combining the demands for, let's say, a basic income with the demands for reconstituting corporate law, taking over or changing, altering radically property rights over means of production, distribution, and communication. And how does that fit in with the Green New Deal? That is, we are not ready. We're far from it. So we better get cracking. Hopefully, it will be a few more years before the wave comes, and we will be ready. But we cannot do what we did, with Occupy Wall Street, which is to gather in a square and have endless discussions about whether we should sell sandwiches, or not, amongst ourselves. There has to be a better plan this time around, and we need to engage disaffected members of the big tech community and disaffected members of Wall Street. And there are. They were in 2008. We just didn't engage them. They were financial engineers that would have helped us unpick particular CDOs and bring the whole system down if we had acted together by, targeted payment strikes of particular utility companies, for instance, and so on. This is a very big issue, but we need to develop new types of collective action, and we need to change the cost-benefit balance of collective action, because so far, anyone who participates in collective action suffers a huge personal cost for tiny expected personal benefits. So only heroes and heroines participated since the 19th century in collective action, because the cost was so great personally. We need to change that. We need to redress this. And I think technologies can help us if we deploy them for subversive purposes.
I mean, it's such a big frame that we have, but I just wanted to put on the table that perhaps I agree with everything both of you have just said, but perhaps we need a bigger frame still for this momentous, historic phase that we're living through. So let me try and articulate it, and then I'd love to hear what you think. There's been this dynamic going back for thousands of years of new technologies and innovations being introduced to our species, very slowly at first, but radically changing everything about our social lives, the way we relate to each other, governance, etc., all the way going back to the plough. But in recent decades, crossing a threshold in 1945, when we developed the technology to destroy ourselves, that rate of change has just shot up, and it seems exponential now. We are acquiring, as a species, the power of small gods, modest gods, with synthetic biology, with the impact we can have on ecology just through externalizing the costs of the economy, through weapons and drones, and of course AI at the center of it, which is like a threat multiplier. It can be weaponized to just accelerate and deepen the threats in all these domains. I just wondered how we can incorporate, us being of the left and the concerns we have into this sort of unique historical moment where technology is about to cross this remarkable threshold with AI and all the implications of that. Naomi, perhaps.
I think you're right that the frame needs to be very large. What we need most is synthesis. And then, this is what Yanis was saying about this feeling of like, oh, well, like we're still acting as if there's a sort of scarcity of care around, like, how, what can we focus on right now? Well, if we're focused on war, if we're focused on fascism, then we can't be focused on climate, right? And I think this is part, or if we are, if we're focused on AI, then that has to be like the mainframe. So, and I think this is a product of the way our behavior has been modified and the way we've been trained by the algorithms and the machines, is that it biases towards very compartmentalized sort of small issue areas and against a sort of enlarging of the framing that these tools actually really cannot handle synthesis. They cannot handle connecting of the dots. They handle very sort of pointed interventions. And so we're trained to do that very well. And we're losing the muscle of like, what are the common threads? And how can we have a much more expansive understanding of what connects the willingness to let people die in Greece after the economic crisis, with the willingness to let islands drown in the Pacific, to the willingness to let Palestinians starve in Gaza, and also what is the alternative to that kind of necropolitics, you know? So it's big story time. I mean, part of it is narrative work, and part of it is that really specific kind of policy technology work that Yanis has been talking about. But I feel like we really need both. What do you think, Yanis?
Look, when I wrote Techno-Feudalism, at the heart of my hypothesis was that, look, folks, don't worry about what artificial intelligence is going to do to us. It's already done it. My whole point about the rise of cloud capital and this transformation into a kind of neo or techno-feudal order, this has happened on the basis of the algorithms that we already have. I don't fear, Terminator movies worry about the singularity when the machines, become sentient and start attacking us. I'm not worried about that. That will never happen. And you know what? And why does it need to happen? If there is a drone today, and there is a drone today, that can come into this room, into this house of mine, and with facial recognition find out who I am and autonomously kill me, do I care that it is not sentient? I don't give a damn. It's already happening. As for your point that our intellect grows much slower than our capacities, technological capacities. Again, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the shock of the old, not the shock of the new. Remember, we had COP28 this year, right? And the head of COP28 was the head of an oil company. Now, you don't need modern technology to destroy us. That on its own is, pushing us beyond the point of no return as a species on this planet. With or without AI, even if, big tech become all very nice guys and Elon Musk becomes, a Naomi Klein supporter and an environmentalist, the fossil fuel industry is going to destroy us anyway. So it's, it's old-fashioned work that we need to do with newfangled technological means, and also understanding that that they are, if we had one reason for appropriating and socializing the means of the technological means of production, distribution, communication, and so on, now we have 100 reasons to do it. So that doesn't change. Finally, since Naomi said, let's not be sci-fi, or you fear that you're going to be sci-fi, I am going to be sci-fi. Because I need to confess where I got my idea for cloud capital. I got it from 1969, an episode of Star Trek called The Cloud Minders, which was such a prescient episode because it's all about people living on a cloud. The ruling class living on a cloud, whereas the troglodytes, everybody else, was working in the labyrinths of the mines on the planet. So there you are. That's my, my allusion to science fiction.
That's a good one. I'll end with something a little more recent, which is The Matrix, where, I think the part of the reason why the imagery of the Matrix is so sort of omnipresent in the culture, like the idea, the red pill, the blue pill, and so much of that imagery has stuck is that model, right, of the reality being this simulation and humans being machine food, right, underneath the reality, humans just being in these pods with just life but no life, and all they are is just energy for the machines.
that they created.
feels true. What?
That they created.
Yes.
So it's a
And so
Dr. Frankenstein story too there.
yeah. I mean, it's not a new story, but I think we feel that we have become machine food because we have become machine food, and that's part of the liberation project.
And I think that was the whole point of Marx's Das Kapital. The whole point about Marx's Das Kapital is that technologies that have the capacity to liberate us, we have volunteered. It's not the machine's fault. We have chosen, through particular social relations between us, to serve those machines, and to reproduce them. And the beauty of the Marxian story is that it's not just a story about the bad capitalists and the good workers, because the capitalists are also absolutely destroyed by their subjugation to capital, because they go to bed every night, absolutely worried about bankruptcy. So they never enjoy their surplus value. They never enjoy their capital gains. They always have to constantly feed the machine. So that's nothing changes, in other words, except everything.
I just want to say, Naomi, thank you so much for making time for this podcast. It's really such a pleasure to get the chance to talk with you and to listen to you engage with Yanis. And as always, Yanis, fantastic to hear your thoughts on all of this. I hope audiences enjoy listening as much as I did. Thank you.
I'm deeply honored by having Naomi here tonight or today for you. And of course, the documentary that you did, Raoul. I mean, what can I say? I'm almost embarrassed.
Well, congratulations to both of you, and lots of gratitude. I know how much work it was to make it as strong as it is, but it's going to be a great tool for our movements and to stop being machine food. And thanks for the excuse to chat. We need this. Thank you. Much love. Take care.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to our channel.